$117,000 gone. That's what the average 2022 Austin home buyer has lost in equity. And the website that just told 221 million Americans prices are heading up 2% this year. They revised that same forecast 7 times in 12 months, including a call that prices would fall, and almost no one noticed. Here's what that number isn't telling you. Zillow's own forecast tracker shows a story that never made the headlines. They opened the year projecting a 2.6% gain. By April, that had flipped to a 1.7% decline. The most visited real estate platform in the country was quietly telling anyone paying attention that values were about to drop. Then came the reversal. October brought it back to 1.9%. November pulled it to 1.5%. December landed at 2%, 7 separate revisions, 1 calendar year. And once you understand the financial machinery behind why that number always finds its way back to positive, $1.7 billion in annual revenue that depends entirely on buyers clicking, agents advertising, and mortgages closing. You'll read every one of their forecasts with a completely different set of eyes. But set Zillow aside for a moment, because the bigger problem with that plus 2% figure isn't where it lands. It's what it's burying underneath it. 24 of the 50 largest metros in America posted home value declines last year. Some of the markets that were generating bidding wars 2 years ago are now showing double-digit losses. Homeowners in those cities have watched more equity disappear than most households bring home in a full year of work. We're going to walk through every one of those markets with the actual data. There's also one figure that came out in November, and not a price number, not a rate number, that does more to explain where this market is heading than any forecast currently in circulation. Almost no one is connecting it to what's unfolding right now. So whether you're a homeowner watching your equity and wondering if the damage is done, a buyer trying to figure out if the window is actually open, or a seller trying to understand why serious foot traffic has dried up, let's get into what's really happening. The national average is hiding a market that is split down the middle. Start with the metro level data because zip codes matter more than national headlines. Zillow's own numbers confirm that 24 of the 50 largest metros saw home values fall in 2025. That's not a market with minor turbulence in a few corners. That's nearly half the country moving in the opposite direction from the headline. On one side of that divide, the Northeast, select Midwest markets, and places like Buffalo, Hartford, San Jose, San Francisco, and New York are holding value. In many of these areas, it's still a seller's market. The reason isn't complicated. Builders physically cannot keep up with demand. Zoning laws permitting bottlenecks, limited developable land. Supply is structurally capped. When you can't add inventory, prices don't fall. If you own in these markets, your equity position is intact. If you're trying to buy in, competition is real. On the other side of that divide is the Sun Belt, and this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Austin was the pandemic era's breakout market. Tech migration, remote work, constant media coverage about the next Silicon Valley of the South. If you purchased there in 2022, the numbers since then have been painful. Home values have declined 6.8% in the past 12 months based on Zillow's own index. Measured from the 2022 peak, the drop is nearly 20%. On an average priced home, that translates to a loss of roughly $117,000 in equity. The ICE Mortgage Monitor now estimates that approximately 6,200 Austin homeowners who bought in 2022 owe more than their property is currently worth. Inventory is sitting 69% above pre-pandemic levels with 4 months of supply actively on the market. Southwest Florida is a harder conversation. Cape Coral and Fort Myers earned the description of the worst housing market in America from the Wall Street Journal last year, and the underlying data supports that. Year over year values are off by 10%. 8% of homeowners there are underwater. Yeah, the highest concentration in the entire country. Cape Coral alone has more than 6,500 active listings with insufficient buyer demand to absorb them. Average days on market, 67. Average accepted price, 4% below list. One riverfront property listed at $11.9 million in late 2023 has been reduced to $8.9 million. It's a $3 million reduction on a single home over less than 2 years. Northport, Nair, and Sarasota are down 8.6%. Jacksonville has shifted fully into buyer's market territory. Miami remains the lone Florida metro where any meaningful price growth is projected. And even that projection sits at barely 1.1%. So when the national headline reads plus 2%, understand what that calculation actually represents. It's averaging Buffalo's appreciation with Cape Coral's losses and presenting the result as a coherent picture of the American housing market. It's not a useful number. It's a mathematical blend of two entirely different realities. What you actually do with this depends on which side of the split you're on. If you own in Austin, Cape Coral, Jacksonville, San Antonio, or any Sunbelt market where inventory has been climbing, stop letting national headlines set your expectations. Pull up your specific metro on Zillow, Redfin, or Realtor.com. Look at months of supply. Look at the year-over-year price trend. Look at average days on market. If supply exceeds 6 months and is trending upward, you're in buyer's market territory. That means prices likely have more room to fall. That's not pessimism. That's supply and demand doing exactly what it always does. If selling is on your radar, this is where the most expensive mistakes are being made right now. Pricing has to reflect today's closed sales, not what your neighbor got 18 months ago, not last spring's estimate. Current comps only. The Cape Coral data is clear. Properly priced homes are moving in roughly 60 days. Homes priced against 2022 expectations are sitting, accumulating days on market, and eventually taking cuts anyway. Accuracy is being rewarded right now. Optimism is not. If you're staying put with a fixed rate mortgage and a 5 to 7 year horizon, the daily fluctuations don't affect your payment. The market can move in any direction without changing your financial reality, unless you need to sell, refinance, or pull equity within the next 2 to 3 years. That's when paper losses become actual ones. For buyers, this is the most favorable negotiating environment in nearly 5 years. Cape Coral sellers are accepting offers at 4% below, asking. In Austin, builders are offering rate buy downs, closing cost credits, and finish upgrades just to generate contracts. The National Association of Realtors reports that 15 of the 50 largest metros are now classified as buyers markets. 1 year ago, that number was 6. Miami, New Orleans, Austin, Jacksonville, Indianapolis. The leverage in these markets has genuinely shifted. The trap buyers fall into is waiting for the absolute bottom. There's no announcement when a market bottoms, no notification, no signal. The better question isn't when to buy, it's whether the current value represents a fundamentally different price point than 2 years ago. If a market has already corrected 10 to 20% from its peak and sellers are still offering concessions on top of that, you're entering at a meaningfully different cost basis than someone who bought in 2022. That's where the opportunity lives. In the Northeast and constrained Midwest markets, Buffalo, Hartford, San Jose, New York, the calculus is different. Inventory remains well below pre-pandemic levels. Sellers still hold pricing power. Correction in these markets isn't imminent because the problem was never demand. It's that construction simply cannot keep pace. Zoning constraints, land costs, and permitting delays aren't solved in a year. Sellers in these areas still have leverage, but mortgage rates above 6% have reduced the available buyer pool. Price it to the current market and it moves. Anchor to 2021 expectations, and you'll be wondering why your open house traffic disappeared. Now let's come back to why Zillow's forecast keeps returning to positive, because after seeing what's happening in the actual markets, this part lands differently. 7 revisions in 12 months, plus 2.6 in January, minus 1.7 by April. Then back up, 1.2, 2, 1.9, 1.52. The reversal from negative to positive happened between April and October. So the question worth asking, did the housing market fundamentally change during that stretch? Did mortgage rates drop meaningfully? Did inventory contract? Did buyers flood back in? None of that happened. Rates held above 6% all year. Inventory continued climbing. Existing home sales were running near 30-year lows. What changed was that Zillow's rolling forecast model absorbed some seasonal activity data and a handful of metros where declines leveled off. The model corrected upward because rolling models respond to recent inputs. That's how they're designed. But the more important context is this. Zillow's forecast isn't separate from Zillow's business model. It's embedded in it. The company reported $2.6 billion in total revenue last year. Of that, $1.7 billion came from the residential segment. Agents purchasing buyer leads through the Premier Agent program, where every click on Contact Agent generates income. Another $199 million came from Zillow Home Loans, which originated $4.7 billion in purchase mortgages, up 53%. Rental revenue added $630 million, up 39%. Every single revenue line depends on people actively buying, selling, and searching. A sustained negative forecast disrupts every one of those streams. When the April minus 1.7% projection hit, the narrative became home prices are expected to fall, buyers pause, sellers pull listings, agents reduce ad spend, transaction volume contracts, revenue follows. This isn't an accusation of data manipulation. The economists building these models are doing their jobs. The point is structural. When the entity publishing the forecast is also the entity generating $1.7 billion annually from real estate activity, a persistently negative forecast creates a business problem. A positive forecast functions as earned media. The incentive structure doesn't require anyone to consciously distort anything. The model will simply find its path back to positive because the conditions surrounding it make that the natural outcome every time. 4 signals that tell you more about where this market is heading than any national forecast. Start with the November number, because this one data point explains the mechanics underneath everything else. First-time home buyers represented just 21% of all purchases in November. That's the lowest share recorded since the National Association of Realtors began tracking this figure in 1981. 44 years of data and entry-level buyers have never been this absent from the market. The median age of a first-time buyer has climbed to 40 years old. In the 1980s, it was the late 20s. NAR's deputy chief economist noted that this share has contracted by roughly 50% since 2007. Here's why that single number explains the entire market condition. When first-time buyers are frozen out of the bottom rung, the entire transaction chain above them stalls. Fewer starter home sales means fewer families moving up to mid-tier homes, which means fewer listings at higher price points. This isn't a problem isolated to young buyers. It's a velocity problem affecting every homeowner at every price level. It's why transaction volume is stuck near 30-year lows, even in markets where demand theoretically exists. The foundational step of the ladder is broken. All cash buyers just reached a record 26% of transactions. Repeat buyers with a median age of 62 are driving volume with substantial down payments and no mortgage dependency. This is what NAR described as a tale of two markets. Equity-rich older buyers recycling wealth through real estate, while buyers under 40 are increasingly priced out of entry. The engine of the market isn't new household formation anymore. It's accumulated wealth-changing hands. New single-family construction starts are on pace for the weakest year since 2019. And the geographic pattern makes the split worse. Builders overconstructed across the Sun Belt during the pandemic boom and are now pulling back. But they still cannot build at scale in the Northeast and Midwest, exactly where supply shortages are most acute. Correction markets accumulate more inventory. Constrained markets stay constrained. The gap between the two sides of this divide continues to widen. And even in Zillow's most optimistic projection, 12 of the 50 largest metros are still expected to be posting declines by the end of 2026. In their own best case scenario, the most favorable outcome their model produces, nearly a quarter of major American markets are still losing value a full year from now. When the bull case for a housing market still includes widespread ongoing decline, that's not a recovery story. That's a market in an active repricing cycle. So the next time a plus 2% headline appears from Zillow, from the evening news, from an agent presentation, the right question to bring is 2% where? Here at US Realty Pulse, we cover this market the way it actually behaves, by metro, by data, without the spin. Zillow is a $2.6 billion business publishing a number that serves its revenue model. There's nothing sinister about that. But your job, whether you're protecting equity and timing a purchase or deciding when to list, is to understand that a national average in a market this fragmented is not information. It's noise. 7 revisions, a forecast that swung from plus 2.6 to minus 1.7 and landed back at plus 2. And a $4 trillion housing divide that no single number will ever accurately represent. If this changed how you're reading the market, subscribe to US Realty Pulse. We break this down every week with actual data, zero hype, and a clear focus on what's happening in real markets on the ground. Drop a comment below and tell us which side of this split your market is on. We go through every one. See you in the next video.